comprehensive history of Italy.
Yeah, this is a big one. From, prehistoric times right up to today.
That's right. The stack of sources you've given us covers, well, basically everything. The land itself, politics, culture, all of it.
It's such a layered history, isn't it? You can really see how the geography shaped things, all the different cultures coming in.
And that constant tension, like you said, between incredible unity and then fragmentation.
Exactly. It goes back and forth.
So our mission here is to guide you through this amazing material. We'll pull out the key developments: politics, society, economy, culture, environment.
Yeah, try to show how historians approach these things, what's really important to grasp about Italy's past, and how it connects to the present.
Think of this as your shortcut. You'll get the big picture on Italy's fascinating, sprawling story.
Okay, let's jump in then.
So looking at this stack, where do we even start with Italy? It feels like we have to begin with the place itself, the geography.
Right. That makes sense. The sources you've got here really emphasize Italy's distinctive shape, that, boot kicking into the Mediterranean, anchored by the Alps up north, and then the Apennines, that mountain range running right down the middle.
Plus the islands, Sicily, Sardinia.
Yeah.
They're crucial too.
Mm-hmm. And that location, smack bang in the middle of the Mediterranean, that wasn't just scenic.
No, it basically guaranteed constant interaction, didn't it? Trade, cultural exchange. It was always a crossroads.
With the millennia, absolutely. A magnet for people and ideas. And the climate, that's important too. It varies quite a bit.
Right, you've got the classic Mediterranean vibe down south and along the coasts. Hot, dry summers, mild, wet winters.
Perfect for olives, grapes, citrus fruits. The sources mention all those.
But then up north, especially in the Po Valley, it's more continental. Colder winters, humid summers.
Yes, supporting different stuff, like cereals. So that diversity meant a whole range of resources across the peninsula.
But it wasn't always easy living there. The sources detail a lot of environmental challenges throughout history.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Things like earthquakes and volcanoes, Vesuvius, Etna. They've caused devastation again and again.
And flooding, too, right? Especially the Po River. They needed serious hydraulic engineering for centuries.
Big time. And malaria, that was a huge problem in marshy areas like the Pontine Marshes near Rome. Really limited where people could safely live until modern drainage projects.
And deforestation. That seems like a recurring theme.
It really does. From Roman times, needing timber for building for ships, then medieval charcoal production, right up to modern agriculture.
Wow. So even thousands of years ago, human activity was already having a big impact on the environment.
Definitely. And they were dealing with tricky terrain, soil getting exhausted. It forced them to adapt, Terracing, like you still see in places like Cinque Terre.
So these weren't just background issues. They fundamentally shaped where people settled, how they managed resources.
And even drove engineering skills. And today, Italy still faces major environmental problems, pollution, climate change impacts like droughts and floods. It's an ongoing story.
Going way, way back. The sources trace humans in Italy astonishingly far back.
I know, it's incredible. We're talking lower Paleolithic, maybe 800,000, 850,000 years ago?
That long?
Yeah. Sites like Monte Poggiolo, Soprano, Esernia La Pineta, they show evidence of really early human activity.
And then later, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens.
Right. Homo neanderthalensis around 50,000 years ago. Then Homo sapiens shows up. Rapara Mochi, Greta da Carvalho are key sites for that.
Which takes us through the prehistoric periods. Mesolithic, around 10,000 BC, hunter-gatherers, leaving rock art.
Then the Neolithic, starting around 6,000 BC. That's a huge shift. Agriculture arrives.
From the Near East, migrants bringing crops, pottery.
Exactly. Cereal cultivation starts. Pottery appears. We even see early megalithic structures.
Then the Copper Age, mid-3rd millennium BC. Indo-European migrations, coppersmithing starts.
Yeah, cultures like Remedello are associated with that. Then into the Bronze Age, roughly 2000 to 1000 BCE. More migrations, like the Beaker culture people.
And distinct regional cultures really start to develop.
Absolutely. You get cultures like the Terramare in the north, quite advanced farmers and metal workers, and the Nuragic civilization in Sardinia.
Ah, yes, the Nuraga structures. Those amazing stone towers.
Incredible, aren't they? Suggest sophisticated bronze working, trade all the way to Mycenaean Greece, early centralized settlements, maybe. Complex societies anyway. And the Apennine culture dominated central and southern Italy then.
And they were getting more systematic about using resources, mining copper, iron.
Yeah, which leads straight into the Iron Age. Starting around 900 BCE, this is critical. Ironworking spreads Proto-Villanovan cultures.
And this is when we really see those distinct groups emerge clearly. Etruscans, Latins, Samnites.
Exactly. All those indigenous Italic peoples alongside the Greek colonies popping up in the south, Magna Græcia. The peninsula was already really diverse before Rome dominated.
Okay, let's zoom in on those indigenous foundations. The Etruscans, they seem like major players before Rome really got going.
Oh, definitely. From about 800 to 300 BCE, the sources paint a picture of impressive city-states, Tarquinia, Cerveteri.
Known for advanced art, religion,
Yeah.
that divination thing, Spacina.
Yeah, reading animal entrails. Pretty unique. And sophisticated urban planning, too, like drainage systems. Their governance was a mix of kings and aristocrats.
How much did they influence Rome?
That's a big question. Certainly in things like religious rituals, maybe architecture like the arch, possibly early political structures. The extent is debated, but the influence is there.
And the Latins.
Absolutely foundational for Rome. They were based right there in Latium. Plus you had the Nuragic Sardinians and all the other Italic groups forming federations or hill fort states across Italy.
Now, the sources mention this debate about where the Etruscans actually came from.
Yeah, that's a classic historical puzzle. Some ancient writers like Herodotus suggested they migrated from the Near East. Others argue they developed right there in Tuscany, out of the earlier Villanovan culture.
And modern genetics adds more confusion.
Sort of. Sometimes genetic studies point towards migration, sometimes towards local continuity. It's complicated.
So the takeaway is, maybe don't assume they just arrived from somewhere else. Look at the local development, too.
Exactly. The indigenous development from cultures like Proto-Villanovan seems really significant. It wasn't necessarily in either situation.
And before these formalized states, what did society look like? Tribal groups.
Yeah, the archaeology points to pre-state tribal societies, like the Latial culture around where Rome would be, or Terramare and Golasaka up north.
And those Nuraghi and Sardinia hinting at something more centralized early on.
Right. Governance seems to have been a mix: warrior chiefs, councils of elders, but even then they were developing ideas about territory, about basic rules or legal precedents.
And the Iron Age burials show a clear elite emerging.
Definitely. Rich grave goods point to an aristocratic class with wealth and power.
What about religion back then? Rooted in nature.
Very much so. Early spirituality focused on nature worship, honoring ancestors, sacred spots in the landscape, springs, groves, mountains. These created patterns of sacred geography that lasted for centuries.
Like a divine protection idea for the community.
Kind of, yeah. And creation myths, Romulus and Remus, Aeneas, these started as oral traditions in this early period, giving communities a shared story. Interestingly, Etruscan mythology itself was influenced by Greek stories, showing those external connections were already happening.
And speaking of external influences, Italy's location meant it wasn't isolated at all.
Far from it. Being in the middle of the Med made it a hub. Greek colonization in the south, Magna Græcia. From the 8th century BCE onwards, that was huge.
Yeah, bringing Greek culture, political ideas, democracy, oligarchy laws, city planning, writing, art, religion, literature. It profoundly shaped the South and influenced the North, too. Some sources even hint at earlier Mycenaean contacts. And don't forget the Phoenicians.
Right, traders, especially in Sicily. Did Italy get the alphabet from them?
That's what the sources suggest, yeah. Crucial development. Central Italy was definitely plugged into these Mediterranean trade networks early on.
Which brings us, inevitably, to Rome. That famous founding date, 753 BCE.
That's the traditional one, yeah. Tied up with the myths of Romulus and Remus, or even earlier links to Aeneas from Troy. Romulus is the legendary founder.
But the archaeology suggests it was more gradual. Settlements way earlier, maybe large-scale organization around 800 BC.
Exactly. So 753 BC probably marks the emergence of a lasting political entity, not necessarily day one of the city itself.
Okay, so that date kicks off the Roman kingdom period, 753 to 509 BC, ruled by 7 legendary kings. According to later writers like Livy, yeah, Romulus to Tarquinius Superbus. Though we have to be careful, the sources point out contemporary records were mostly lost after the Gauls sacked Rome later on. These are later reconstructions, full of legend.
But the sources do suggest it was a monarchy, initially under Etruscan and Latin kings. And key government ideas started then.
Yes, fundamental principles. Archaeology supports the idea that things like the Senate, early magistrates, legal procedures were developing, and they were already integrating neighbors, like the Sabines, which set a pattern for later Roman expansion.
Until the last king, Tarquin the Proud, gets overthrown around 509 BC. Hello, Republic.
Led, tradition says, by Lucius Junius Brutus. a founder figure for the Republic.
And he becomes one of the first consuls. That dual leadership thing, why too?
To stop power concentrating in one person, they'd just gotten rid of a king. They didn't want another one.
Makes sense. That story about Brutus executing his own sons, real or not, it makes a point.
It absolutely dramatizes that Roman ideal public duty over personal ties, reinforcing the Republic's values right from the start.
So the Roman Republic, 509 to 27 BCE, this is where those famous institutions really take shape.
Absolutely. A really complex constitutional setup evolved. You had the Senate, various legislative assemblies, magistrates like consuls, praetors, quaestors.
With serious powers, like imperium command.
Command of armies, power to govern. And coercitio, the power to enforce laws, punish people, maintain order.
And the 12 tables, 450 BCE. That sounds foundational.
Utterly critical.
Yeah.
Rome's first written law code. It set down rights, responsibilities, became the bedrock of Roman law for centuries. Plus, you had that tiered assembly system trying to balance the interests of the patrician elites and the plebeian commoners.
And during the Republic, Rome just expands, takes over all of Italy by the 3rd century BCE. How?
Relentless military campaigns, yes, but also smart alliances. They didn't just conquer and crush, they often incorporated defeated peoples, offering forms of citizenship or treaty status.
Which built loyalty.
To a degree, yes. Then the Punic Wars against Carthage. 264 to 146 BC, that was the big one. Winning those cemented Roman dominance in the Western Mediterranean.
A massive struggle. The sources mention Scipio Africanus using Hannibal's own tactics against him at Zama.
Classic Roman adaptability. And as they expanded in Italy, they gradually extended citizenship. That created precedents for inclusion, even if full citizenship was limited initially.
So the Republic set patterns for governance that lasted, drawing on Etruscan and Greek ideas too.
Definitely. Etruscan law, divination, Greek political and legal models from Magna Græcia. They all fed into Roman thinking, and the whole culture emphasized civic duty, military service, following legal precedent.
What about the economy? Still mostly farming?
Largely, yes. Wheat, olives, wine were staples. But Roman infrastructure was huge for the economy, too. Those amazing roads like the Via Appia, aqueducts, drainage systems like the Cloaca Maxima in Rome.
Facilitating trade, hygiene.
Yeah.
But also impacting the environment, like we talked about.
For sure. And economically, they grew increasingly reliant on slave labor, especially on big farms and on resources coming in from the provinces they conquered outside Italy.
Society stayed pretty hierarchical, though. Patricians, plebeians, slaves.
Very much so. Rigid hierarchies were standard. There was some social mobility, but generally limited compared to, say, later commercial centers.
Culturally, the sources stress this Greco-Roman synthesis. Rome, borrowing and adapting.
Hugely. Roman architecture is often lumped with Greek as classical, but they innovated massively, developed their own column types like composite and Tuscan, and their mastery of the arch, maybe learned from the Etruscans, led to the dome.
And just the scale of their engineering. Roads, bridges, aqueducts, baths, theaters, arenas.
Mind-boggling stuff. And concrete. Inventing and using concrete, especially from the 1st century BCE onwards, allowed them to build things like the Pantheon's dome, the Colosseum. Just revolutionary. But timber was still vital.
Leading to that deforestation problem near cities like Rome.
Yeah, though the sources also show they had complex long-distance timber trade. In art, Greek influence is clear in painting styles, and Roman music was largely based on Greek models.
Literature, too, following Greek forms.
Initially, yes. Writers like Virgil, Cicero, deeply influenced by Greek literature and philosophy. Early Roman plays often adapted Greek myths.
And religion, similar story.
Roman paganism absorbed a lot from the Greeks, identifying their old gods with the Greek pantheon. Etruscan mythology was also influenced by Greece, but older indigenous nature worship persisted too, alongside the state religion focused on rituals ensuring Rome's safety, like the Vestal Virgins.
The sources give some fun glimpses into daily life, too. Entertainment.
Oh, they knew how to put on a show. Public spectacles, sometimes violent gladiators, chariot races. Big events.
Sponsored by the elite to show off, keep people happy.
Exactly. Show generosity, maintain order, display power. They built specific venues for it all. Amphitheaters, circuses.
And athletics for young men seemed almost like military training.
Jumping, wrestling, boxing, racing, riding, swimming. The Campus Martius in Rome was basically a giant training ground. And that mosaic showing women playing sports in bikinis, that's quite something.
It really is. What about less formal fun? Games.
Lots of dice games, tesserae, tali, board games like Latrunculi, Calculi, things that were ancestors of backgammon. Kids played leapfrog. Wealthy people had dinner parties with music, poetry. Poor folk went to taverns, joined clubs.
Clothing was a big deal too, showing status.
A huge cultural marker. The basic thing was the tunic, like the Greeks wore, but the toga, that was distinctly Roman, a mark of male citizenship.
And the style and color meant something.
Totally. Senators had the whitest ones. Magistrates, priests, kids wore one with a purple border, the toga praetexta. Republican ideals tried to balance this display with some notion of equality among citizens.
But people stopped wearing the toga eventually.
Yeah, by the 4th century AD, it was mostly gone for everyday wear. Cloaks like the paenula and callium were more practical. Wool and linen were standard, seen as simple, frugal. Making cloth was women's work. But clothing was expensive for most people.
Luxury stuff was available, though. Silk from China.
Oh, yeah. Cloth of gold, silk, that super expensive Tyrian purple dye. Conservatives complained about foreign luxuries eroding traditions and class lines. Sources say by the late Republic, it was sometimes hard to tell free from slave by clothes alone, except for senators.
And later, influences from outside, like Germanic styles.
Yes, practical tunics, trousers, hats like the Pallius Panonicus became more common in the later empire.
What about education in Rome?
Heavily influenced by the Greeks, especially after the conquests in the East. Formal schooling became more common around 200 BCE. Kids learned reading, writing, basic math from age 6.
And literature.
Around age 12, secondary schools taught Greek and Roman literature, and for the elite aiming for public life.
Rhetoric was key. Public speaking.
Absolutely essential. From about 16, they went to rhetoric school, often taught by Greeks. You had to be a good speaker, know the laws, persuade people. Vital for a career in law or politics in the Republican Empire. It was very much an elite education focused on public life.
So the Republic eventually gives way to the Empire. Big shift.
Huge. Augustus establishes the Principate in 27 BC. The Julian-Claudian dynasty cements imperial rule, no going back to the old Republic. Italy's still the heartland, culturally, politically.
But economically starting to rely more on the provinces.
Increasingly so, yeah. As the empire expanded and the provinces developed, you get the Pax Romana period, relative peace, stability for a while.
But not forever. The sources mention crises by the 3rd century CE.
Right. Political instability, economic problems, pressure on the borders from groups like Goths, Vandals. Imperial control starts to weaken.
And meanwhile, Christianity is spreading like wildfire.
Phenomenal growth. Then the Edict of Milan in 313 legalizes it, and Emperor Theodosius makes Nicene Christianity the state religion in 380. Massive impact.
Fostering church building, monasteries.
Big basilicas like Old St. Peter's start going up. Monastic communities forming, like St. Benedict's at Monte Cassino around 529 CE, setting the pattern with his rule.
Leading up to that traditional date, 476 CE, the fall of the Western Roman Empire.
Very conventional marker, yeah. End of the Western Roman political structure. Beginning of fragmentation. Italy becomes a battleground.
Ostrogoths, Byzantines, Lombards.
Carolingians, Normans later, each bringing new systems. The Lombard invasion in 568 AD is key. The sources stress how it really set that pattern of political division in Italy for over 1,000 years.
Creating that three-way split. Byzantine, Lombard, papal territories.
Exactly, all competing. The Byzantines try to hang on, reconquer parts, set up the Exarchate in Ravenna. The Lombards bring Germanic law, blend it with Roman traditions, focus on warrior elites, personal loyalty, influencing feudalism.
And society changes too, people moving out of declining cities.
Yeah, significant ruralization. People move to fortified villas, estates, church centers. Those late Roman estates evolve into early medieval manors, with serf-like labor becoming more common than slavery.
And monasteries become islands of knowledge.
Absolutely vital. Places like Monte Cassino preserved classical and Christian texts, kept learning alive through really turbulent times.
So medieval Italy, defined by that fragmentation. City-states, popes, kingdoms, all jostling.
That's the picture. High Middle Ages, from the 11th century or so, you see the amazing rise of the northern and central city-states, the communes, Florence, Venice, Genoa, Milan.
Taking advantage of weaker imperial and feudal power.
Exactly. And they develop really sophisticated republican governments, elected councils, magistrates, written constitutions. They were pioneers.
Innovating in representation, civic life,
Yeah.
and becoming economic powerhouses.
Major financial and commercial centers. Merchant republics. Venice is incredible, stays a republic from the late 600s all the way to 1797. Complex constitution, amazing stability for a long time.
Though some cities shift towards rule by powerful families, the signori, like the Medici in Florence.
Right, transitioning towards ducal rule eventually. And militarily, these cities invested heavily. Fortifications, Florence's triple walls, Lucca's hexagon, coastal towers against pirates, later gunpowder, professional soldiers.
Then there's the papacy, carving out the papal states in central Italy.
Emerging as a major temporal power alongside their spiritual authority, they developed their own unique governance church bureaucracy, legal systems blending moral and political power.
And constantly clashing with the Holy Roman emperors.
Oh, yeah, big time. The investiture controversy over appointing bishops is a famous example. This struggle fueled the whole Guelph versus Ghibelline conflict across Italy, pro-pope versus pro-emperor factions.
Which actually helped the city-state stay independent.
Ironically, yes, it fragmented authority. Though the sources mention the papal states themselves could be pretty chaotic sometimes, leading to things like the Avignon Tape Treaty, papal diplomacy was unique, mixing spiritual and political goals to influence Europe and stay independent.
And the South. Very different from the northern communes.
Complete contrast. Centralized kingdoms under foreign rulers, Normans first, then Hohenstaufens, Angevins, Aragonese. The Normans created a particularly strong centralized state after conquering the south in the 11th century.
With advanced administration, written constitutions, taxes.
Quite sophisticated, yeah. But southern feudalism was generally more rigid, class distinctions sharper than in the northern cities with their merchant classes. Medieval society overall, feudal lords, serfs in the country, distinct from the Roman setup, and plenty of tension between commoners, popolo, and nobles in the cities.
And foreign interference was just constant through the Middle Ages.
German emperors trying to assert control, that endless pope versus emperor struggle, keeping the Guelph-Ghibelline divisions alive, which, again, weakened central control and let the cities thrive.
Economically, farming's still dominant overall, but the cities are booming with trade.
Absolutely. Venice, Genoa, masters of long-distance sea trade. Banking takes off in Florence with families like the Medici. Cities grew rich on wool, silk, spices.
Which meant more demand for resources, more environmental impact.
Yeah, draining wetlands like the Po Valley for farmland, cutting down forests for timber building, ships, fuel. In the countryside, the manorial system continued, with sharecropping, mesodraia becoming common, especially in places like Tuscany.
Culturally, monasteries were still key, universities starting up.
Monasteries like Monte Cassino remained crucial learning centers. New orders like Dominicans and Franciscans connected with city folk. You had the Carolingian Renaissance revival of classical learning earlier. Romanesque, then Gothic architecture flourished. Sicily under the Normans was this amazing multicultural hub, Arab, Norman, Byzantine influences. And universities like Bologna, 1088, Padua, 1222, became centers of scholasticism, think Thomas Aquinas.
Moving into the Renaissance. The sources describe this as truly pivotal, 14th to 16th centuries.
Yeah, a period of incredible cultural flowering, artistic genius, intellectual leaps. Rebirth isn't just art and science, it's also cities bouncing back, trade booming after late medieval struggles like the plague, centered in Italian cities.
And humanism is the key intellectual driver.
Absolutely central, focusing on classical texts, Latin, Greek, literature, history, philosophy. Petrarch rediscovering Cicero's letters, Valla critiquing the donation of Constantine using textual analysis, challenging old assumptions.
Championing human potential, Pico del Miranola.
Exactly. The dignity of man. Studying classical texts laid the foundations for modern scholarship in so many fields. Humanistic education aimed for well-rounded individuals, blending classical learning with civic virtue.
And the arts just explode. Painting, architecture, sculpture.
Setting global standards, perspective in painting, classical architectural principles, new sculpting techniques. Masters like Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael embody those humanist ideals. Religious art is still huge, communicating theology. Literature thrives. Dante's Divine Comedy basically creates standard Italian. Boccaccio's Decameron reflects post-plague life. Petrarch's poetry influences all of Europe.
And later, Baroque art emerges. Caravaggio, Bernini.
Right. Late 16th, 17th century. Dramatic style, reflecting the Counter-Reformation. And crucially, the status of the artist just skyrockets during the Renaissance. Individual genius is celebrated.
Fueled by the patronage system. Wealthy families, the church.
Critically important, it wasn't just charity, it was a relationship. Patrons commissioned works, supported artists and thinkers. The Medici in Florence are the classic example. They made Florence the cradle of the Renaissance.
Showing that link between wealth, power, and culture.
What?
Politically, this era also saw new thinking.
Definitely. City-states were like political labs. Machiavelli writes The Prince, analyzing power politics in a secular way, how rulers really operate, foundational for modern political science.
City-states experimenting with constitutions, diplomacy, while some areas become more centralized duchies.
Right, like Milan, Papal Rome, Florentine republicanism, even under the Medici, developed ideas about civic humanism, the citizen's role, influential stuff.
But then, bang in the middle of this flowering, the sources place the Italian Wars. 1494, 1559. Devastating.
Truly devastating. Starts with the French invasion over dynastic claims, ends up turning Italy into a battleground for France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire for decades.
Showed Italy's military strengths, but also its fatal weakness, fragmentation.
Exactly. The wars brought new military tech, new strategies, but mostly just wrecked the place. It became a struggle for European dominance, fought out on Italian soil.
And solidified foreign control, setting the stage for centuries.
Yeah, the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis in 1559 basically put large parts of Italy under Spanish Habsburg control. Renaissance writers like Machiavelli hated it. The prince ends with a plea to kick out the barbarians. The wars proved divided. Italy was vulnerable to unified foreign powers.
So the early modern period after the wars, mostly Spanish domination.
For a long time, yeah. 16th, 17th centuries, perpetuated disunity. Italy became a proxy battlefield. The papacy held central Italy. The southern kingdoms stayed monarchies under Spain, later Austria, Bourbons.
And the economy. There's debate about a 17th century decline.
Big scholarly debate, as the sources note. Did Italy fall behind rising powers like England and the Netherlands? Trade continued, but its relative position is the question.
Environmental management continued, though. Venetian lagoon defenses.
Yes, practical stuff like that, river control in the Po Valley. But deforestation also continued, shipbuilding, fuel.
All this fragmentation under foreign powers eventually leads to the Risorgimento, the drive for unity in the 19th century.
Right. After Napoleon shook things up reforms, nationalism, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 basically put the old fragmented map back together. Austria dominating the north, Pope in the middle, Bourbons in the south, foreign powers pulling strings.
But the nationalist idea was growing, fueled by shared culture, history.
The Risorgimento movement aimed specifically to unify Italy. The sources stress it took everything: popular feeling, clever diplomacy, military action, often needed help from other European powers. It created the framework for modern Italy.
And key figures emerged, their roles debated. Mazzini.
The revolutionary idealist articulated democratic republican goals, founded young Italy, spread the nationalist message, crucial for the intellectual and organizational groundwork. Some others, like Cattaneo, wanted a federal republic, but that was too radical for the leaders who actually succeeded.
Cavour seems presented as the pragmatic mastermind.
Often, yes. Prime Minister of Sardinia-Piedmont used shrewd diplomacy, alliances especially with France, to defeat Austria in 1859. He understood international politics, knew they needed more than just revolution. His 1858 speech shows that shift to politics. The unified Italy that emerged a monarchy under Piedmont was much closer to his vision.
Then there's Garibaldi, the popular hero, the military leader.
Hero of the two worlds. Absolutely vital militarily, led popular uprisings. His expedition of the Thousand conquering the South in 1860, hugely significant, used guerrilla tactics. People loved him.
But his role is often contrasted with Cavour's military versus political.
Yes, and sources mention his military failures too, like trying to take Rome in 1867. And finally, King Victor Emmanuel II.
The King of Piedmont, who becomes the first king of Italy in 1861, the symbol of legitimacy.
Exactly. The monarchy provided the existing state structure unification could rally around, father of the fatherland. The sources emphasize historians still debate the balance. Cavour versus Garibaldi, top-down state building versus bottom-up popular movement, regional resistance.
Key events. Unification Wars starting around 1848, Veneto gained in 66, Rome finally taken in 1870.
And a liberal constitution based on Piedmont's was adopted in 1861, making the Kingdom of Italy, 1861-1946, a constitutional monarchy, very different from the Papal State or the southern kingdoms before it.
Culture played a huge role in building this new national identity.
Absolutely vital. Writers like Manzoni the Betrothed became a national touchstone. Composers like Verdi, his operas, often resonated with nationalist feelings. Standardizing the language based on Tuscan models was crucial for creating a shared Italian experience, even though regional dialects remained strong.
And that famous quote by D'Azeglio, "Italy has been made, now it remains to make Italians."
Perfectly captures the challenge. Unification was just the start. Forging a unified society from diverse regions took much longer, and unification brought new problems.
Like the North-South divide, industrial North, agrarian South.
Exactly. Industrialization took off in the North Milan, Turin, Genoa triangle. The South lagged behind, creating the persistent Southern question.
Leading to mass immigration.
Huge numbers, especially from the South. Over 14 million left between 1876 and 1915, heading mainly for the Americas, Northern Europe. Reshaped Italy and the destination countries. Society changed too, rise of the urban middle class in the north, rural areas emptied out, regional identities, Sicilian, Lombard, remained very strong.
And historians keep re-examining the Risorgimento, moving beyond hero narratives.
Definitely. More focus now on social history, gender, class, regional perspectives, people left out or resisting unification. Debating the top-down versus bottom-up forces, using new methods to understand marginalized groups.
The 20th century brings more huge upheaval. World wars, fascism.
After unification, liberal Italy pursued colonial ambitions. Then WWI Italy joined the Allies in 1915, hoping to gain Italian-speaking territories from Austria. The war was traumatic, the aftermath chaotic, fertile ground for fascism.
Mussolini comes to power in 1922 with the March on Rome.
October 1922, yeah. Fascism centralizes power, crushes opposition, pushes industrialization through things like corporatism, trying to manage the economy through state-controlled syndicates, often not very efficient, big public works like draining the Pontine marshes.
And lots of propaganda linking fascism to ancient Rome.
Heavy use of Romanità, architecture, symbols. Also, the Lateran treaties in 1929 resolved the conflict with the Vatican, creating Vatican City.
And there's still debates about fascism today.
Oh, yeah. How much popular support did it really have versus just coercion? How does it compare to other totalitarian regimes? How should Italy remember and deal with its fascist past? Still very live issues.
And fascism leads Italy into WWII.
Allies with Nazi Germany. Enters the war June 10, 1940. Mussolini hopes for quick gains from France, Savoy, Nice, Corsica, Tunisia. Was annoyed when France kept its colonies after the armistice.
Italy fights in North Africa, the Balkans.
Greece joins the invasion of Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, bombed Palestine, took British Somaliland, but often needed German help. The war stretched Italy thin, brought devastation home. Allied invasion of Sicily in mid-1943 is the turning point.
Leading to Mussolini's fall, the armistice.
Mussolini ousted July 43, new government signs armistice September 8th, chaos. Italy switches sides, declares war on Germany October 13th. Then you have the War of Liberation, Italian resistance fighting fascists and Germans in the north, Italian troops fighting with the Allies. Liberation Day, April 25th, 1945. The whole experience, defeat, civil war leads to getting rid of the monarchy.
And lots of contested history from this period, too. War crimes, bombings, resistance, foibe.
All highly debated. Italian war crimes in the Balkans, Ethiopia, the impact of Allied bombing, the nature of the resistance civil war or national liberation, and the post-war foibe massacres of Italians by Yugoslav partisans, all still sensitive, contested areas of memory.
Which brings us to contemporary Italy post-1946, the Republic.
A fundamental reset. Referendum abolishes the monarchy, June 46. New constitution in 1948, parliamentary democracy, civil liberties, regional autonomy established.
But politics seems famously unstable. Lots of governments.
Yeah, over 60 since 1946, frequent coalition changes. But the sources point out there's also underlying institutional continuity thanks to the 48 Constitution. It's been a multi-party system, historically dominated by the Christian Democrats, with a strong communist opposition and strong regional political flavors.
Until the clean hands scandals in the 90s shook everything up.
Tangentopoli, Bribesville. Massive corruption investigations starting early 90s basically brought down the whole post-war party system, the First Republic, led to new parties emerging, Berlusconi's Forza Italia, the Northern League, the Democratic Party, ushering in the Second Republic. Still volatile coalitions, plus the rise of populism like the Five Star Movement. Berlusconi also really changed politics with his media empire.
Italy also got deeply embedded in Europe during this time.
Founding member of NATO 49, key player in the EEC 57, which became the EU, joined the EU proper 93, adopted the Euro 2002, deeply integrated. EU membership shapes policy massively, though sometimes causes friction over sovereignty or finances.
Economically, there was the post-war miracle.
Incredible boom in the 50s and 60s. Rapid industrialization, especially in that Milan-Turin-Genoa triangle, transformed Italy into a major G7 economy. But the North-South gap remained a big issue. Despite efforts like the Mezzogiorno policies to boost the South, mixed results there.
But more recently, facing economic challenges. Low growth, high debt.
Yeah, since the 2000s, growth has been sluggish, around 0.5% average. Public debt soared, especially after 2008, over 160% of GDP now. Youth unemployment is a persistent problem. Still relies heavily on tourism and lots of small medium businesses, SMEs.
But there are strengths,
Yeah.
areas for growth.
Definitely. That SME network is resilient, strong luxury goods sector, Prada, Gucci, tourism, obviously, potential in the digital economy, fintech in Milan, Bologna, renewables like solar in the south, green hydrogen, high-speed rail.
Socially and demographically, huge changes too.
Post-war boom, reduced poverty, brought mass consumerism, welfare state grew, mass media like RAI shaped culture. People kept moving from country to city. Then, from the 90s, Italy becomes a country of immigration, not emigration. Big flows from North Africa, Eastern Europe, Asia, creating a more multicultural society, sparking debates about identity, integration.
And birth rates plummeted.
Dramatically, from over 4 kids per woman in the 60s down to about 1.3 now. Big worries about aging population, pensions. The sources also mention child poverty is still high, over 20% in 2020.
Culturally, Italy became a global powerhouse post-war. Film, fashion, food.
Absolutely. Neorealist cinema critiquing post-war life, Rossellini, Sica, then Fellini, Visconti. Iconic fashion houses, design, cuisine conquered the world. Literature too, Umberto Eco, Elena Ferrante. Multiculturalism adds new layers now. Even within Catholicism, Vatican II in the 60s brought modernization. And language reflects both regional identities, dialects are still strong, and the national unity fostered by education since 1861.
Military and security challenges have changed too.
Post-war relied heavily on NATO. Bases like Aviano, Sigonella sometimes caused protests. Now big challenges are maritime security in the Med, with migration, cybersecurity, domestic terrorism. Though the years of lead, late 60s, 80s, with groups like the Red Brigades was the peak of that. Debates still linger about state involvement back then, the strategy of tension.
Internationally, Italy remains active.
Very much so. Key player in the EU, UN, G7, balances Mediterranean interests with Atlantic ties. Huge diaspora influence. Priorities include regional stability, especially North Africa, migration management, cultural diplomacy.
And environmental issues are pressing today, circling back to where we started.
Absolutely. Air pollution, waste disposal, sea level rise, climate change impacts droughts, floods, heat waves. It's driving investment in renewables, adaptation, and protecting that immense cultural heritage is a constant environmental challenge too, working with UNESCO, passing laws.
And the study of Italian history itself keeps evolving.
Constantly. More sources, more interdisciplinary approaches, social sciences, environmental studies. Debates continue on sensitive topics like fascist memory, mafia influence. Still lots to explore. Daily life of ordinary people, marginalized groups, environmental history across periods, comparing how different regions developed.
What an incredible journey. Millennia of history just layered on top of each other. You really see that push and pull between fragmentation and unity.
And how external influences constantly shape things, governance, law, art, everything. Yet through all the turmoil, this amazing cultural creativity just keeps shining through.
It really is those layered histories of unity and diversity the sources talk about. Italy's legacy isn't just stone and paint. It's this living society still dealing with the echoes of its incredibly deep past.
And you see those historical forces playing out today, that balancing act between strong regional feelings and national or European identity, facing modern challenges, economy, demographics, environment.
So here's a thought to leave you with, thinking about that D'Azeglio quote again.
Yeah.
Italy has been made. Now it remains to make Italians.